thought, I want to start with a question. I want to ask you, how many of you consider yourself an immigrant? Or you think you're an immigrant, or you've been an immigrant in a country? No one? Okay, few of you. How many of you study abroad? A little bit more. How many of you been traveling to another country? Okay. I want to ask you this question because we cannot see, I have a small presentation with pictures, but it's okay, I tell you the story. Because migration has many negative connotations in our society. So many of us...
the pictures directly from your desktop.
Okay, well, I can send it to you. It was the idea that it was a presentation when I had the thing as migration is very polemic. So then if we ask ourselves if we are migrants, even if we live in another country, many people, when we consider ourselves expats or international students or international people working abroad, but the connotation of migrant and migration have negative connotations in our society. So just asking this question to ourselves, why? Because it has negative connotations, and basically we don't identify with migration, even in most of us in our society, in the global society. We are migrants, maybe for a few months, maybe for a year, maybe for 2 years, maybe I live in another country, so I'm myself an immigrant, even if I don't consider myself an immigrant because it's also in Europe. Anyways, but it's interesting to put this on the debate because the way words have connotations, we hear this before, the emotional elements of discourse mobilize people in a positive or negative way, and some words have a positive or negative connotation, and some frames are positive or negative according to the political and media discourse. And it's good to stop and think about it, because if we really think about it, migration by definition means that one person moves from one place to another to live for the period of time. It can be shorter or longer, but it means that one person moves from one place to another for a better life. Usually it's for a better life because you want to study or work, or you have a relationship, or what is the reason can be different, but basically you move from one place to another looking for a better life. And many of us, we do that inside our country, in another country for longer or shorter. But migration in the last years have a negative connotation. Why? We should also look at the political frames, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the refugee crisis, because I think we need to understand public opinion, feelings and fears. And this is one of these topics that have been lately in the media and in the political debate very strong in most of our countries. So I find it interesting because I see that most of you, we are from different countries. We see this in a different way, but there is a mainstream narrative that makes migration a big question mark. We are questioning who has the right to move, who has the right to go from one country to another. So actually I think we are living nowadays the challenge of migration, and it's interesting to have a look at if we have papers or if we don't have papers. This was published in The Economist like a couple of months ago, probably some of you read it, and basically it tells you what is the best passport that you can have to travel to more countries. If you are German, you are very lucky because you can travel to most countries than most people in the world. If you are also from other European countries like Sweden, the UK, Finland, France, Italy, Spain, the same. Well, basically they are all wealthy countries. We can travel European countries and also Australia, Japan, and we can travel to many countries because we have a passport that allows us to travel. If we look at the worst passports, people that don't have papers and they find very hard to go from one place to another, actually are people from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Somalia, and Syria. Last year, if you remember, 2015, most of the refugees or people who tried to come to Europe were actually from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and we had this situation where actually the people who are running away from persecution, from war, from terrorism, from conflict, are the ones who have less mobility. So I think it's interesting to ask ourselves why. Because actually mobility is one of these, in the Human Rights Convention, the right of mobility is actually one of the human rights. And basically mobility is a right that opens the doors to many other rights. Because if you cannot move, if you are stuck in a place, if it's a refugee camp or it's a place where you cannot move, you can also not exercise other rights, like the right of education, the right to work, and many other rights. So the right of mobility is very important. And actually we can see that countries that are more wealthy and have more political influence are the ones who have more right to travel and more right for mobility. For other reasons, but I think it's important to keep this in mind. Because when we go back to the framing, to the political and media debate, why we have this debate right now, why we have public opinion have fears and feelings that are negative. And I want to talk about this, and then we will move to how we can mobilize public opinion in a positive way. But I think it's good to have a look first where these public opinion feelings and fears are coming from. And I'm going to tell you a story, because I'm a storyteller and a journalist and I love stories. I'm going to tell you a story and then we do a small exercise because I want you also to talk and participate. I'm going to tell you the story of Amir. Amir is a Kurdish Syrian refugee who used to live in Kobani. Kobani is in the Kurdish area in Syria. He went with his family and his wife with 3 children. They went to Turkey in 2013. They lived in Turkey almost 2 years. But Amir and his family, they never got papers. They never applied for papers. It's very difficult. But also, he worked illegally in the countryside in Turkey for his family, and he was collecting money because the idea was to go to Canada, because his sister was already in Canada, and they had the dream to go to Canada when they left Syria. He collected 5,000 euros, and then he got the chance to come to Europe illegally with the smugglers. They went to Lesbos, but the idea is that they were planning to go to Canada. He never submitted an application in Turkey. He never submitted an application for Canada for a legal refugee status. He and his family were illegal immigrants who actually crossed the border to Greece because they wanted to travel to Canada and apply for refugee status. Well, this is the story. And before the story, I was gonna tell you the thing, but very quick because I want to focus also on the positive side of it. We'll go back to the story in a second. That basically in the media during the last year, 2015, we really saw a bipolar debate with 2 main frames. The frame that the refugees were victims and a human drama frame, and the frame that they were intruders. So then we need to respond. The solution was security control. So what was the problem? The problem is that there is an invasion, or they are coming, they don't have papers, some of them could be potential terrorists, many other frames. Basically the idea is that they were intruders, so then we need to control the borders. Security control was the answer to the refugees and migrants coming. The other position was a drama frame when it was a victim, and then we feel sorry, and the humanitarian frame goes to this frame that we need to help. So thinking about the framing effects of this discourse, we saw many pictures, many situations like this. When there were families crossing, we feel sorry for them, and then at the same time we saw the police and security taking care of the borders, and actually that the reaction of people was fear, trying to protect our borders. But I would like to mention that we need to also think about the invisible refugees, because we've been talking about this refugee crisis. We even call it the refugee crisis with capital letters. Well, actually we were talking about the refugee crisis in Europe, because countries like Lebanon been receiving 5,000, 10,000 refugees every single day, and there is almost 2 million of refugees in Lebanon, a country that have more refugees than the whole Europe altogether. It's interesting to have a look at this because we are talking about perceptions, numbers, information, and perceptions, and how public opinion about these topics, as many of us, we don't have a personal experience with these topics. I want to ask you, how many of you have been in a refugee camp? Okay, great. 3 people, that's really a lot. How many of you have been visiting refugees in an asylum center in your country or the country where you live? Okay, 2 of you. How many of you is friends with a refugee or a person with a refugee background? Okay, that's more, like 6, 7. Okay, but not all of us, we have a personal experience. So basically, the experience that we have about these numbers, information, and perception come through the media. So that's why I think it's interesting to put things in perspective also about these numbers. because probably you hear in the news thing about Kenya. Kenya has this refugee camp already for 25 years, 3 generations of people being born there, and we hardly hear about the refugees till last year, and we hear about them because they came to Europe. The same with the Syrian refugee crisis. Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan been receiving refugees every single day for 5 years, and we hardly hear about it. So basically the impact of media image and the political frames in this debate, and how we don't talk about these invisible refugees, we only talk about this debate when it comes very close to us. And we have these two main frames in mind, and I would like you to think about the story I told you about Amir and his family, taking into account these two main frames that the media and politicians been using. The frame that most refugees are victims, and so for humanitarian reasons we should help, or most refugees are intruders and they are coming and this we don't have control, but we need to really, for security reasons, have control of this influx of massive people coming. Actually, the British tabloids, as you know, are very good at making this story big numbers. Also numbers, when you don't define numbers, people are afraid because, okay, if you say a massive influx, it's really like you don't know how many. It can be 1,000, 2,000, or 5 million. So then it's like how these frames being really in the media polarizing victims and intruders. I want you to think with the short story I just told you about Amir. He's a Kurdish Syrian refugee. He lived with his family 3 years. Irregularly in Turkey. He collect 5,000 euros. He paid that to the smugglers in order to go to Greece. So then he crossed illegally. He never submit an application, and he had the intention to enter the EU illegally because they don't have papers. So in the tables that you are in 2 or 3, in 2 minutes, just think what frame will you use if you will be a politician and a journalist to tell this story. What will be the main frame you will use and why? According to what's been happening in politics, not your own personal. What do you think will be the way the story could be told? What do you think will be the main frame? It can be both, but which frame will you emphasize and why? Okay, in 2 minutes we think very quick about it, and then we say what do you think and why. You will use one frame or the other. Remember?
You discuss in groups, Noemi.
Yes, in groups
In your
of...
tables.
Yes, in your own tables, like for 3 minutes, and then we go back and we say what you think and why. So we go back to the story of Amir, and then we are thinking about what will be the headline, the frame that we will use to tell this story. Who wants to start? Yes.
We had who are they really?
Sorry?
Who are they really?
Who are they really?
Yeah.
So that will be the headline.
The headline would be, yeah, who are they really?
But what do you mean?
From the British press, they'd probably
The
see
British
them
press, so
in the intruder frame.
yeah, we put
Okay, so you will be questioning who are they. So you emphasize in they, not the family, no name, yes, abstract. Okay. Who else? Yeah, it's okay. You can also make a comment. It doesn't. It's great if you have a headline, but you can make a comment. It's more talking about the frame.
I would just add one point, which would be to say that I feel like the headline would very much be different depending on where you're coming from. Like I'm actually
Sure.
from Canada,
Yes.
and I feel like a lot of the thinking around the refugee situation leans much more towards the humanitarian side of things.
Okay. So what will be the headline in Canada?
Probably something like, help these refugees, like bring them home, something like that, really.
Okay, but it's great. I think we need to put this because basically the debate counts because your media and your politicians are having a narrative, and also, well, it's far away, but also the Canada being the country that, I mean, it's far away, but they still have more refugees than the U.S., what is a way bigger country, and the policy in Canada even quite positive. According to it can be better, but of course way better than many European countries. So then how public opinion or the way we will think as a citizen, if I tell you the story, you will feel sorry also because you identify more with the victim frame, because that could be, yes. Who else? Yes.
So we've got father of 3 seeks safety in Europe.
Okay. So that's more, you summarize the story basically. So that you tell who he is and what he's doing, what he wants to do.
Yeah, but also trying to like have the children involved, like.
Okay, sure. And safety is positive in the sense that they are looking for refugee, or they are looking for, yeah. Somebody else?
Yeah, over here, like, I think we also had a sense that, like, we lack information to make a good judgment of this case.
Of course, but you lack of information many
All the
times
time.
as a
Yeah,
journalist.
exactly.
You just get sometimes,
Yeah.
honestly, you
So-
sometimes need to make a story of something like this, and then you make the rest of the story. So that's one of the problems. And I have to say, for example, as a journalist, Syrian crisis, there are no journalists right now in Syria because everyone freelancer. So then it's actually a war that been not reported properly because it's impossible to be a freelancer, and only big news agencies, only in specific moments, they can go with protection from countries. It can be Russian, can be, so they cannot go by themselves. So this is one of the problems of this crisis. We get information very, it's not really. Really, so that's one of the problems. But for sure, that's a very good point. You don't have enough information,
So,
sure.
so we frame the headline more like in the form of a question, or we try to balance it. Family flees war-torn Syria in search of a better life. Victims or intruders? Question mark.
So then you question the people. So then people need to think, what do you think about the story? So you question at the end.
Yeah.
Okay. Mhm. Well, then you use both of them, and then you give the question mark. Okay, interesting. Let's have a look, for example, several headlines of what politicians could say also about this. For example, several frames that could be used. Alan and his family are actually not refugees, and they could not get protection. They are part of a dangerous influx of illegal migration that is a security threat for the EU. His story, their story, you can say, Mena and his family, his story is a lesson for those who want to cross the Mediterranean. He and his family tried to come to Europe illegally, so they should return where they come from. Turkey is a safe country, therefore, Amir and his family could stay in the first country where they arrived after they left Syria. So, basically, European politicians will go for this one because now Turkey is a safe country because they decide that. So after they decide Turkey is a safe country, you realize we are talking about the story of a Kurdish family. And Kurdish people, as you know, in Turkey is not a safe country at all.
Yep.
And this is a reality for some Syrians who are Kurdish. So basically, this is one of the topics that we need to take into account. For example, it's not a safe country, and basically, right now they cannot come to Europe because we made this deal with Turkey. But regardless of politics, but politics, of course, we came to this policy because public opinion in Europe was really against the refugees coming. So the debate between who say what first, media, public opinion, politicians, this interaction. But I'm gonna tell you something about this story. We are actually telling the story of someone you know, a story that you hear. It was actually the face of the refugee crisis in September. It's actually the story of the family of Alan Kurdi. Alan Kurdi was a Kurdish Syrian little boy, 2 years old, with a red sword, who appeared in the coast in Turkey, in the beach, and it was this Turkish policeman taking him in his hands. And basically, after that, it was a switch of public opinion in September. He gave a different face to the refugee crisis, a humanitarian face, and this is the story of his family. I changed the name of the father, but this is the story of his family. They were in Turkey for more than 2 years. They were planning to go to Canada. They collect 5,000 euros, and he and his wife and the 3 children, they were in a boat to go to Greece because they would like to go to Canada. So, was Alan a real refugee? His family doesn't have papers. They never applied for it. They tried to come illegally to Europe, but actually, because of the victim frame, because of the humanitarian frame, because of feeling so sorry about for this little boy, there was a switch in public opinion last year in June when the European Union was talking about quotas for the refugees for the different countries. Nobody agrees, so then in the summertime, many refugees tried to come to Europe. Then in September, this picture, the story of Alan Kurdi really changed the debate. And actually, if we ask the question, he was a real refugee? Did he have papers? No. But actually, the moral frame, for moral reasons and humanitarian reasons, nobody, politicians or media, were asking if this little boy was a refugee or not. In the media, he was really called a refugee. He was a Syrian little boy, a refugee who was looking for protection for asylum in Europe. So basically, we change our perspective, how frames can influence the way we tell the story, or the way we talk about this. It really can change the effect of the framing discourse and the victim humanitarian frame. But of course, this frame at the same time was competing with other frames. Of, for example, you remember the fence in Hungary, or when they were trying to cross from Croatia and Serbia, and all these people and the security and the police. So it was a competitive frame. But actually, the emotions, I mean, it was an emotional frame. The emotional elements of the discourse that mobilized people. John was talking about this. He mentioned the thing about the documentary on human trafficking. When somebody asked a question, he mentioned that. And I think it's interesting to see how this emotional response to the discourse can mobilize people. But of course, emotions can come and go very quick. And then when you had the story of Cologne, then suddenly public opinion switched with this potential, this story that actually, the interesting thing of the media, and that's why I want to bring this to the debate, because we need to double think why they are telling us this story with this frame. Sometimes we don't have enough information, but sometimes we realize that we've been manipulated, or at least we need to be aware of that. I can go back to the story of Cologne, because actually that story, for example, was full of rumors, actually of the, I think it was 54 people who were arrested that night, only 4 have a refugee background, and actually 3 of them were from North Africa. So, but then, of course, then, when the snowball effect starts, and these media hives, and then you create a rumor, then for many people, they are still, actually, some people still think that they were refugees. I went to a conference organized by Russians, but not because of that. Anyways, but the public opinion in Russia and in Eastern Europe being really, really against the refugees coming, even though they don't have any refugees, what is interesting. But there was like a politician from Bulgaria, and actually a parliamentarian politician in Bulgaria, from Bulgaria, who was saying in a public speech in a conference that also children were raped. And I was like, okay, wait a second, I have a question. Where did you read that? Where do you got that information? He made his own part of the story, and he's really lying, but nobody's telling him that's a lie, that's not true, that's a rumor. And then you really dismiss public opinion, because of course we don't have enough information, and we believe that authority, we think, well, if he's a politician, he may have some information I don't have. I tell you a small story that happened to me. I went to Greece in January, and I went back to the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, where I live. And when I came back, I have a drink with my friends. So my friends were asking me, how was Lesbos? What kind of refugees do you find? And I was telling the stories that most of them in January were still from Syria, from Afghanistan, and few of them from Iraq. And I was telling the stories of the people I met in Lesbos, in the refugee camp. But one of my friends told me, yeah, Noemi, but this morning in the news I hear that the Dutch, there is a parliamentarian from Dutch parliamentarian from the Dutch commissioner who has a very high position in the European Commission. He was saying that 60%, because he makes his own statistics at home, 60% of them were actually economic migrants, of the refugees coming in 2016. He said, well, yeah, in 2015 they were refugees, but 2016 they are actually economic migrants. Well, he says 60%, so my friend really believed me, but was watching in the news that this guy was saying that 60%. So then I went home and I read the news, and I was like, oh my God, it's really like, he was lying, basically, that's it. I mean, according to, the next day was published, according to Frontex, to the European Union, and also the Greek government, 91% of the refugees coming to Lesbos in January were from Iraq, from Syria, and from Afghanistan. You can tell me that you don't want them to come, that you don't like them, or that you don't believe in refugee conventions, or that there are too many. Okay, that's an opinion, and you have the right to have an opinion, but don't lie. And this is something we have a responsibility as citizens to really spot the lies, and don't really, okay, sometimes it's difficult because we don't have enough information, but some things are contradictory. And this is something to think about, the power of dominant frames, and then trying to really seek for the truth or for information that basically we need to be aware that this is happening, and that we are manipulated many times by politicians and the media. I would like to mention a frame that someone mentioned. Someone asked a question, and I thought it was interesting about the climate change or the context of the climate change frame, because for me this is one of the frames that been forgotten in this story about the refugees, because there is a big connection between desertification, climate change, poverty, and internal displacement that in many cases it actually lead to conflict and war. And this is something that, for example, in the Syrian crisis, you probably hear that it was very dry years from 2006 to 2011, 5 years where it was very dry. And many people from the south had to move to the north, and that was actually creating some social tensions, because people in the south of Syria, many of them are Sunni, and in the north of Syria, they were more the minorities, like the Christians and the Yazidis and the Shia. So basically, the social tension was also, there are other factors, but one of the factors, of course, is always poverty, is the lack of water, the lack of resources, and actually the climate change, whatever we want to call it, is a fact. And in this side, in the Middle East, always water being a problem, and this is creating other problems. It's creating internal displacement inside the countries, because people always try to go inside the countries. You also see that with the refugees. Most of the refugees, the first country where they arrive is not Greece, is not Germany. They've been already through a journey, many of them being in another country or several countries on the way. And many of them being internal displaced before they leave the country because of war, because of conflict, or because of poverty. This is basically, we could call it the forgotten frame, because climate change and food security play a very important role in raising political and social tensions. And these political and social tensions, we have some responsibility. And I think this is a frame that is a little bit missing in the debate, because of course countries need to have their borders, it's necessary to have some control, but then we need to take into account the responsibility that we have. And really just want to mention this because I think it's important to consider that we have some responsibility, and I miss the responsibility frame in the way we talk about the refugee crisis. Well, just to mention this is a picture of a lady in a satari near the refugee camp in Jordan. And when I met her 2 years ago, she told me that she was afraid that her children will not remember how the green color looked like, because that's a desert. They already live in a desert for a year and a half, and basically it's even called the lost generation, the Syrian children who are growing up in the desert, because 75% of the refugees, the Syrian refugees in Jordan and Lebanon, are women and children. So this is something, just to finish with this, but I think looking at the roots of the problem, we need to emphasize on this situation. That's why I mentioned about this lady that she's worried that her children will not remember how the color green looked like. The climate and water risk and poverty and the connection with this and the responsibility that we have, or at least we should do something about it, because actually we could do something related with minimize the impact of climate change. Investment in water management is possible in countries like Israel, so it will be possible in other countries too. And food security, because this will reduce the risk of conflict, and that will reduce the reason why many of the refugees are coming, because of poverty, because of conflict. So what is our responsibility? What could be our answer? And what could we do about the situation, looking at the roots of the problems? So basically, yes, finish with this about the refugee crisis, the responsibility to help the invisible refugees, and thinking about it. So I finish with this here, and we go back to a more proactive, a little bit the second part of the seminar or the workshop. I would like that we think more about what can we do, but I really think the first part, because when Philip and the Jubilee Center told me if I could talk a little bit about this topic, I wanted to talk first about public opinion, because I think we have a responsibility as citizens. We have a responsibility. We need to look for stories that are balanced. There are many stories, but basically we also need to go for the context, the background story, and the stories behind the story. Because, for example, if we do a little bit of research, we realize that climate change, it plays a role in internal displacement. So being aware of all these topics, because I think here everyone is very educated, and sometimes we shouldn't really allow that politicians and media are misleading us, and not all the media do that, because it's like many politicians are also looking for but basically the fear and feelings that are really, I think the narrative we are taking is the wrong one, so we should really do some research and some advocacy for the right narrative and putting this also in the debate about the refugees. So basically we go to the second part of the seminar. I would like to talk about how to engage civil society, how to improve this relationship, this social harmony that Michael been talking about this morning, and how we can do this relational thinking. I also thought it was very interesting that Michael used the concept relational poverty, because actually people coming from these countries, many of them are very relational, very community oriented, and they could really contribute to our society because we really suffer from relational poverty. So I'm gonna go back to the beginning. One second. So let's go very quick about this, and then we can also ask some questions. Sorry.
5 minutes, huh?
5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, super. So just only want to think a little bit in what could we do in our society, more in our community, in the local level, because sometimes about these global problems we see it's overwhelming. At least we need to have an opinion, a balanced opinion, and we can influence other people's opinion, because I think all of us here somehow we are opinion leaders. So that was my first part of the presentation, but now I would like to talk a little bit about what can we do in our community to increase this relational thinking, and then how we can also pues have stories and have engagement with our society, how we can improve the relationship, and how can we engage with our local community. Basically, what is the role of civil society? That was the question, and basically I think my first part of the presentation was an emphasis of how as a society we need to be the watchdog. We need to be the watchdog and the gatekeepers for the media and the politicians. We need to hold authorities accountable for their actions. If there is a politician that is lying, we can also write an article or tell, like, well, I have these statistics, so I know about this, and basically we need to be aware of this, and this is something we can all do, being a watchdog, or have more information, or when we have it, at least use it for the positive. About doing a campaign related with these topics, human rights and the vulnerable groups, one of the problems of this situation, like the refugees, is like they are vulnerable people that many of them don't have a voice. We call them the refugees. We even don't know their name. So basically also I think having Christian principles and relational principles, how we can also talk with them and make them also part of the story. Not that we talk about them, we talk with them. And I tell you a proposal that you can do in your city if you like. So basically also about how we can facilitate this dialogue and this negotiation, how we can create places for people to meet. So, for example, I organized with some friends some storytelling event. So then we invite refugees and locals to meet, and then people tell their story. In the moment a person tells you their story, you engage, you connect, you listen the story in first person, and completely change the debate. You go from these refugees to a young girl that was 19 years old from Syria, that she was like, everyone call me a refugee. And Maya, my name is Maya, and I want people to know me as Maya, not as a refugee for already a year. So basically, what can we do to facilitate dialogue? Basically, we need to have people in the same place at the same time. And one of the problems of these social bubbles that we have, sometimes many people don't have the chance to meet a refugee. So what they know is about what they hear in the media. And the same with other social groups that are neglected for the mainstream society. We don't know about them. Many of us, we don't know a homeless person. So how we can do initiatives that can really bring people together. I'm going to tell you about a couple of initiatives because I have only 2 minutes, so then the rest if you want to talk about later. Serve the City, maybe some of you know there's an NGO, but in Spain we work a little bit different. We started the NGO 4 years ago, and it have Christian principles that is open to everyone. And one of the main ideas of Serve the City was to create a community in a local level to engage people with the problems or the realities from your city. So we did a campaign. we did a campaign in Madrid. Madrid has a lot to offer to you. What could you do for the city? Because basically we always want the government and other people doing things for us. But what are we doing for the city? So we switch that and we say, okay, how you can serve the city, how you can create this environment. So the idea is creating spaces for citizens to meet. So organizing, for example, community dinners with homeless people, or how you can create spaces with people from different groups can meet and get to know each other. And basically also building skills so we can contribute. We can contribute to what happened in the society, in this society, creating spaces for the citizens. But basically, one of the things is basically we need to give people options and opportunities. And of course, in every context, the different culture, different places, we need to adapt this project. For example, something that we need to do in Spain is that it had to be very flexible, because Spanish people don't like to do things always at the same time. So basically, the website is very flexible. You can even write in the app that you are gonna that you want to volunteer for 3 hours, because we like to improvise. Now I live in the Netherlands, then people plan that 3 months before, otherwise they wouldn't not go. So I mean, sometimes these kind of initiatives of how you can engage citizens with your project, you need to adapt to different cultures. So what will be more adequate, or how we can offer, what can we offer to our city, to our neighborhood. And this is an initiative that is now online. You can look I can send you the website, I send you the PowerPoint presentation so you can have a look. Serve the city, and the idea is donate your job, so you give the work of one day for this for the city. So basically, it's a different concept of doing volunteering, donating one day of your job. All these ideas is the goal is to build community. How we can build community? Basically, we want people to engage and to get to know each other. And one of the initiative I told you is this storytelling, this pocket stories storytelling. And this is a photo context. You can go on the website. Basically, we organize a storytelling event where we bring people from a refugee background and the locals, so then we tell stories. Also, locals tell the stories. What was your first impression when you met a refugee? Because first impressions, I mean, in order to have a first impression, you need to be in the same place at the same time. And actually, this is one of the initiatives. Also, if you want to participate, we have a photo context. So then the challenge is that you met a refugee, you send us the story and the picture, and then you can win an award. So you can have a look at this, and this is where basically 2 ideas about how to build community, how to get to know each other, people from different backgrounds, and how to create more of a relational society with a small initiative that it just takes to have a cafe and meet people. And basically, I think it can help at least to break some of these stereotypes, because usually there is a quote I really like, that people don't remember what you tell them. People don't remember what you did, but people remember the way you made them feel. So the thing about making people welcome from other cultures, from other backgrounds, especially if they are refugees, I think is very important. And I had to finish, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Noemi.